Great, thanks, Britt, and welcome everyone to our conversation today. My name is David Girardi of Forma AI, and I'll be hosting the session today to talk all things comp plan launch. That's our topic for today, and so we're going to go through best practices, how you roll it out efficiently, and how you actually monitor performance and measure whether or not you've done a successful job. And so I have four guests today. I have Bettina Kammerer, Sylvia Alvarado, Don Hubbard, and Nabil Al-Azam here to discuss with me. And I would like to hand it over, starting with Bettina, to give a brief introduction of yourself for our audience today.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Bettina Kemmerer. I'm located in London, the United Kingdom, London. And yeah, I'm doing sales compensation now for 20 plus years, running my own business since 3 years. And yeah, loving what I do.
Sylvia?
Hi, I'm Sylvia Alvarado. I am located in San Francisco in the Bay Area. I've been in sales compensation for a little over 16 years, most recently in Instacart and in the pure digital side of the house, right? Again, we manage all of our design and administration of all of our sales incentive programs here. I have a background in fintech, SaaS, but at Instacart, it's pure digital media, right?
Great. And Don?
Hey, thanks everyone. So Don Hubbard here, leading sales incentive efforts here at Siemens. For those unfamiliar with Siemens, we're a large industrial company headquartered in Munich, in Germany. And we sell all sorts of technology across practically every country in the world through our collective workforce of something like 12,000 plus sellers. So happy to be here. Been doing sales incentives, sales comp for quite a long time, and been with Siemens. Goes by fast. Long time.
Great. And Nabil?
Perfect. Well, great to meet. Great to see everyone, and thank you all for joining. I think so. A bit of my background: Nabil Al-Azam, founder and CEO of Forma AI. So obviously, this topic is very relevant to us and our customers. But I think more, prior to Forma, I worked in sales compensation and Salesforce effectiveness, and so this is one of the most critical times of the year to execute on the rollout. So super excited to dive in and chat with everyone here today. And I couldn't agree more with Don. The time just seems to fly by. 15 years ago to waking up now and being like, that's when we started our career. And yeah, anyways, it's the nature of life. Time flies by.
All right, well, thanks for the introductions, everyone. So I'd like to start the conversation. I know that we are at the end of January, so depending on when fiscal year ends for everyone, I mean, it's typically now as to when we're rolling out the comp plan, quotas are getting finalized, hopefully, and comp plan communications are being rolled out. And so my first question, and maybe I'll start with Don yourself to open up the conversation, but if you could tell the group what would key indicators and best practices be for a smooth and effective rollout when you're starting the year?
Yeah, sure. So I think it always starts with clear understanding of sales roles, simplified plans. That's a never-ending task. So the sellers ultimately have a clear understanding of what we're doing in the comp plan. How am I being rewarded? What do I need to do? What's my goal setting? Hopefully you have a automated cascade of goal setting practice so that speed and understanding is early in the management year. If you start January 1st, if you start like we do on October 1st, speed to get that information out. And it does take a lot of preparation.
And that preparation, is it typically you're saying how early are you starting?
Oh yeah, I mean, so best practice for me would be, as early in the fiscal year, as soon as you start your financial planning for the new fiscal year. For example, here at Siemens, we start upwards of 6 months ahead of the start of the new fiscal. There's obviously many internal stakeholders. There's different growth expectations, both internally and to the external markets. There's clear understanding of how we've been tracking over the last year and what the growth expectations on top of that heading into the new. So really getting that started as early as possible, and then setting a goal, right? So we set a goal for having our sellers understanding the new comp plan, understanding their goals in the first month. And for context, we pay quarterly, right? So even though with a quarterly for the majority of our sellers, we're that first month of the year really trying to get clarity out there.
That's great. And Sylvia, do you have anything to add from your perspective at Instacart or anywhere else that you've been, and how you roll it out in an efficient way?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest area would probably be over communicating on leadership schedules. Like, here are our deadlines, here's where our deliverables, and we're going to need input from you. Just consistently keeping it communicating, and over communicating. Also, I think internally, just recognizing that while we want a perfect plan and we think we have our deadlines, it won't always be perfect. Every year will look a little different. And we just have to be almost flexible or just adaptable to change, right? It could be set in stone up until day, December 31st. We're on a fiscal year of Jan 1. And, come after New Year's, things slightly change for the business, right? And so being able to pivot to those changes and have a natural plan of attack in that sense. And then I think also just knowing your old versus new, right? Some things will take longer than other things. New plans will likely take a longer practice. You have to get more approvals, more input, more stakeholder involvement versus your older plans, which can be consistent potentially year over year, right? We have a mix of quarterly versus annual plans, and so that makes an impact on how often we do the process overall. And so when you have quarterly plans, you tend to do it more often, so that kind of molding behavior of we anticipate we need goals every quarter and so forth is almost mechanically known for our leadership team. But also you have the annual plans that take a little bit longer because they're obviously for more of a longer sales cycle, right?
And so Sylvia, you and Donna both mentioned the key of communication. So maybe Bettina, I can pass it over to you in terms of what does that actually look like? Do most companies utilize the sales kickoff? Are they posting videos to explain the plan? What kind of documents, like what's the best way that you've seen in terms of ensuring that that communication is clear?
Well, the communication starts with your cross-group collaboration. So you need to make sure that you constantly communicate within the finance, HR, sales leadership, these teams, so everyone understands what the outcome of the plan should be. So, and when you communicate it to the sales team, I find that real life examples, are the best way for salespeople to buy into your sales compensation plan. You can use something from the prior year and just turn it into like, this is how your sales compensation payout would look like if we would be using these measures. So this is a very clear statement that your sales team will easily understand. And then always do refreshers. Yeah. So you will have people starting throughout the years. And I see in a lot of companies that they are not picked up basically. So they're just expected from the manager to learn everything. If you do refreshers throughout the years, then even people that did not get it in the first time, they can just sign up and join the refresher training.
Maybe I can add a comment on that too. I mean, I think probably if you're like most of us, simplification is always like a key cornerstone in the design of the comp. So I think the communication always follows how complex is the design, recognizing that not everybody out in the field, spends as much time as we all do developing this stuff in meetings, getting inputs from different, business stakeholders, et cetera. So we're on a constant mission to weed out, complexity in the plan. And I think the more you can do that, the more clear, the faster it'll go. But I think even with that best effort, the second point I would add is multi-channel approach to communication. I don't presume what levels of sophistication of tools that may exist in the audiences, varied companies that are on, but you probably have some tools available. So a multi-channel approach. And what I mean by that is direct manager, central inbox communications, sales ops, the web-based, the being able to push things through like a central, like for example, we use HighSpot as a central place to direct traffic to on, why does the comp plan look like this in a given year? And then obviously assessing how much change from a past year, right? If you're in a year of high change, much higher touch, much higher context. If it's less change, then probably you need less, but you still need the focus, even if there's change or no change. I think the year is always a chance to start fresh, get everybody energized around the comp plan, and so those are some of the things I would add.
Great. We've already had a couple of good questions come in, so I wanted to use this opportunity to maybe ask a couple of them to the group. So one question we had is around ensuring rolling out an urgent comp plan change. Like I guess it could be a spiff, it could be, something happens in the business that requires a very sudden change and rollout. I guess Nabil, maybe I could pass it over to you. Is like, what have you seen works well to make something urgent all of a sudden be smooth?
Yeah, I mean, I think the points that Bettina, Don, and Sylvia have mentioned already around I think like the bigger the change, the more hands-on you have to be in the change management, the more communication it requires. And I think anywhere where you're course correcting, which it's interesting. There's a whole topic of like when do you course correct and when do you not. But like if you need to course correct, it's likely because course correcting, no matter there is a cost, but that cost is better than not doing anything at all. And I think that there's a variety of ways to communicate it, right? In some cases, we're course correcting for the positive of the sales team. Maybe we're correcting quotas, adjusting in ways that's going to benefit the sales team. I think it should actually be seen as an opportunity to kind of get better buy-in. And the best times I've seen, the best rollouts I've seen of that is when the leadership team owns and is very transparent and clear on what led to this mistake happening in the first place, because you want to give confidence that it's not, at least we're not saying that there's not going to be any mistakes in the future that's going to lead to course correction, but we are at least aware of what drove this specific example, and we're going to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Being very transparent there, and then making it clear the impact that's going to have and how you're going to, I want to say, address or at least alleviate the extremes of impact, both on the positive and the negative, to make it as equitable as possible for the population. I think anytime you're doing that, it requires, communication. Like you just want to be on top of it, as many channels to Don's point as possible. So yeah, I would say kind of summarizes it. But
yeah, I'd like to. This is a really good question. I like this one because I think this happens to all of us a lot. The first thought or my reaction to this is, generally speaking, if you can get out in front of the reason why there might be a need, or typically it's like a top-down, where we're not hitting our year number, we've got to do something at the end of the year, just as one possible scenario. Obviously, if something's incorrect, that's a different scenario. I think correction, the pay has to be accurate, it has to be based on what the plan's documented, et cetera. As a general practice, though, in my years of doing this, we've always tried to steer management away from the temptation to do some sort of mid-year change if things aren't going right. Now, I recognize that's not always possible, but there is a high risk to that, the unintended consequences. Even if you get everything exactly right, you probably don't have near as much time to do it effectively as you think. And the end net effect may not really even change the outcome that much from what your plan looked like before the change. So that would be just one comment too, is just a general, kind of cultural influence of try to stick to whatever your measurement, if it's a year, if it's semi-annual, whatever it is, stick to that and make the changes only at those key milestone points.
Yeah, you should not do any change for the sake of changing. Yeah, so the sales compensation plan that is in place for a longer time gives the sales force more confidence in the sales plan. If you see something dramatically happen, like I don't know, wars or the crisis that we have around the globe at the moment, and that mean that you need to change, make a drastic change, then rather rip it on off like a bandit fast than linger along for a long time. Yeah. So and this is something that you can explain through like what's happening and what impact it might have to your company and your sales force.
And you know, it's interesting. You said something earlier on, like that you have this machine around quarterly change,
Yeah.
and it's actually like the cadence of when you should have plan cycles is not always, it's not always the best to have it tied to your fiscal calendar, because if the volume, or I would say like the gap in change between 1 year's comp and the next consistently is significant, then instead of taking in this like every year we have to go through this massive bolus of change, which is kind of in a similar light here. If you're seeing yourself frequently run into these like unexpected changes, you're way better off building in the machinery to have more frequent changes of comp, but have that be a built-in expectation and kind of like build and engineer your comp structures around that. So I think it's probably closer to what you're experiencing, I imagine.
Yeah, and I think one thing is key to remember is that you have the power to be a negotiator. You should have built the trust enough with leadership team to impact that change, whether it's directionally moving it forward, moving it back, or taking it off the table. But you have the power to be a negotiator, right? Have the data facts with you at that table, know the historicals, provide them with all the tools that they need to really either listen to your recommendations, move forward with your recommendations, or have some negotiation pieces there, right? Because there's always that skill of being flexible, negotiating, and reacting in a certain way where the change is not always a no, we can't do that, but it's okay, let me understand what you're trying to solve, and then moving from that point on, right?
There may be other, I know we're spending quite a bit of comment on this one question, but there may be other legal environment, unintended or consequences that come up. I'm thinking of an example recently where, we operate globally, so not in every region of the world is it so simple to just change the comp plan every year. I mean, obviously, every company has that right and can do it and often does do it. There's plenty of surveys out there. How often do you change your comp plan, et cetera? But one thing that we've done where we do see perhaps some of the legal implications coming up is we try to separate out. So the example here would be, let's say we want to do a early quarter spiff or something, or early quarter kind of growth boost. We've tried as much as possible to where that's absolutely necessary, local management insists, separate that out from your core comp plan. So you have kind of your core plan that remains as is, and then you have something else that you can, math out and do the modeling and pay mechanics and ROI on that particular separate, and setting the expectation that where these separate things are done, this is done on a permanent, clear set of reasons why you're doing it, not that it's going to be expected to continue, in perpetuity.
Yeah,
Mm.
those are
I
all
would
great points.
I would want to add that I work for a company where we do every year we did like a year kickoff spiff, which then became relatively redundant because everyone is expecting that you do
Yep.
a year beginning kickoff spiff. Yeah. So when you don't do it, then everyone's mood goes bust. Yeah. So you need to be a bit careful with this spiffs. If they get repetitive, then they are not valid anymore.
Yeah.
And sorry, just also on this topic, another related question I want to ask the group. Maybe we can go quick fire and answer in terms of all of your experience. When does the communication actually happen? So like in my experience, I think I've rarely seen it happen before the fiscal year starts. But what is typical for everyone on the call?
First
So
month of the year.
First
Yeah,
month.
you're right about that rare. I would say if we communicate anything before the fiscal year ends, the prior year, it becomes a distraction on the existing comp plan. People can sandbag or anticipate or do their own math. So yeah, we always try to target that first month of the new year.
if you don't do any change, then there's no harm in communicating that earlier, but only if
Good
you
point.
don't change.
Yeah.
Yeah, same. First, try to do it between like the first, early second part of the second month, the latest. we're conscious of the fact that we're also paying a previous quarter, so you're almost kind of catching up and moving forward and backwards in most cases. So, it's about prioritizing, the focus on the quarter that they're getting paid on, but also the focus on the new year and the plans for the new year, right?
Yeah, the only times I've seen it work well to communicate before, I mean, aside from Bettina, your point on like if it's consistent, I think there's value in kind of giving ease and kind of trust to the organization that nothing's changing. But where I've seen is if you have to do a very radical change to an organization, and maybe it's all of a sudden our shift is, from going from old on-prem sales to cloud sales, right? I mean, this is kind of a thing that a lot of tech organizations went through maybe 15, 20 years ago, but there's lots of examples of this now. And I think if you are painting a narrative of in 3 to 5 years, this is what best in class or, what good looks like to us as an organization. And that is shifting and that narrative is being told at town halls, at every layer of the organization. Then sometimes communicating early and saying, you have this component every year, it's going to take up a bigger portion of your OTE. It does the same thing, Bettina, to your point of like conveying trust because it's not really a change. You're kind of communicating it at once, but giving a timeline that spans multiple fiscal years. I've seen that work well. Not to say that doesn't still lead to some sandbagging. Obviously, a rep's gonna game their comp plan no matter what. That's gonna happen, rightfully so. So it's you just have to factor that into your design and your strategy.
Well, that's absolutely right. You need to make sure that your salespeople still are financially whole. If you change something from an annual to a quarterly payout or the other way around, you need to make sure that they have that they have enough time to rearrange their finances privately. Yeah, so you have a responsibility there as an employer.
Yep.
I think if you're looking at a new business, like it doesn't even have to be change. It's like a new role, new team that needs to be communicated. And it's supposed to kick off on Jan 1, for example. You don't want to get to Jan 1 and say, I'm going to onboard these reps who are brand new managers. This is what their plan is going to look like, recognizing that they'll likely be on some level of ramp, but onboarding them ahead of time is critical, right? Because you're setting them up for success versus kind of holding off everything to be consistent with the rest of the organization, right? So if you have a new business, if you have a new team that's kind of just popped up and it's brand new for the business, definitely the way we've worked before is just introducing that almost starting at the Q4, beginning of Q4, and then building on so they're set up for success on Jan 1, right?
All right, I'd like to shift the conversation to, pretending that the comp plan has been rolled out. I want to now talk a little bit about the buy-in from the actual sales reps. And so obviously you guys have spoken quite a bit about effective communication. How do you ensure that the field is actually understands the changes that have been made? They're bought into why the organization is making those changes, but also kind of maybe a secondary influence is the other things that come along with a comp plan in terms of quotas, territory design and account assignments, right? There's other things that can probably, I think distract a sales rep or make it almost seem like the comp plan isn't fair. How do you kind of take all those different elements and make sure that they buy into the program?
Well, I can speak a little bit to that. I think it's important to have a level of like your sales comp philosophy where everyone's aware of what that is and how you pay for performance, and then link that to consistency and transparency, right? I also think that if they know ahead of time, both from a leadership perspective down to the seller perspective, what that philosophy is, there is a natural response of you're doing something good for us, you're rewarding us versus it feeling like some level of penalization, right? And then connecting that design, whether it's kind of concurrent from the previous year or new for the year, how does that tie back to your philosophy? In what areas does it tie back? Because that continuously makes it just the organization a unison organization, right? It's all, we're consistent, we're trying to motivate you. There's in no way, shape, or form a way of penalizing you, and just having consistent supplying them with tools, estimators, examples, decks, onboarding, office hours, being open about it and transparent, because I think there was a world when we kind of, no, we don't share accelerators, we don't share quota bands, we don't share all this data, but we're in a much different world now, right? Everything, pay for transparency, all of these areas are just open to employees, right? And so it's the same thing for leadership, for sellers, and for the stakeholders that we work for, right? Because that helps them make decisions as well. And so I think for us, it's practicing that vocalization of our sales comp philosophy, right?
Well, you should have guiding principles supporting your company strategy, and you need to be able to explain to every rep what this quota is built of. Yeah, so what flows into this quota element, to be able to explain to everyone, this is what we expect from you to make that number. And this number is not like finger in the air and I guessed it. No, there is actually a proper planning and thinking process behind it to come up with that number or whatever this is. Yeah. So but everyone should be able to explain to their reps, to their directs, what this element is made of. And to be transparent with your strategy is always a good idea, because only when you tell the salespeople exactly what you want from them, then they can do what you ask them to do. Otherwise, they will use some other guesswork and maybe drift off in a different direction. Yeah. So clear communication, transparency in your strategy is key.
Yeah, I think like if you break it apart into two things, I think you touched on one, and it's probably like 80% of the dialogue that we typically see with reps is the quota, right? Like that's if they have a good quota, they feel confident with it. Getting to their OTE is directly tied to it. So it's that's usually where the negotiation points come in. Before I dive into that, I think the other piece is the mechanics, and the mechanics are really about driving, if you think about fundamentally specific behaviors that are going to get them to the targets that we want. And what I've seen work well to test if a comp plan is rolled out well is, any sort of early like KPI, early indicator of whether it's behavioral change, whether it's sales activity, that we can pinpoint and see, okay, we rolled out this thing, we're paying differently based off of term length or whatever it is. Are we starting to see more of those conversations happen in with the customers earlier in the sales process than later, or whatever we expected to drive as behavioral change? I think does wonders on like some of the, on seeing if the sales team understands it. On the quota side, what's interesting is the bigger the gap. So you think about like, okay, you leverage machine learning, you leverage the latest technology to create a very sophisticated and accurate quota. Now, you're never going to get it perfectly accurate at the account level and even at the rep level, but it is the most accurate methodology that you apply across your entire sales force. Very difficult to explain to a seller exactly how that number got generated. So what I've seen work well is if you get the sales team to understand how you've tested the outcome for fairness on the tail end, and actually showing, I know usually this is more of like an admin or kind of strategy team discussion of like, hey, do we have equity fairness across our quota setting process, and aligning on it before we go with it. But I feel like doing that communication to the sales team to say, hey, look, we've measured yes, these quotas are effectively a black box to you. They're generated through these 30 different KPIs that we bring in to measure it. But what we've done is test it over the last 3 years with the data to make sure that at least it's fair across all these different dimensions. It goes a very long way. And so now you get buy-in into the methodology, even if it's complicated. So that's kind of one of the caveats, because simpler quotas doesn't necessarily easier to understand, but not necessarily fair and actually performance driving, right?
And when you're rolling that out, Nabil, in your experience, like who is giving that presentation? Who's communicating that kind of fairness message? Is it the managers? Is it someone in sales ops at head office?
I mean, I think, yeah, back to like to Don's point earlier, it's like as many channels as you can have it. Like the sales manager actually should be sitting down. No one wants to talk about comp, right? Because comp is such a sensitive topic. This is what makes it crazy is like I've seen managers roll out a comp plan. They say one meeting, roll it out, never talk about it again. In reality, it should be like we should be guiding the sales managers to sit down with their reps and be like, okay, let's account plan together. How are you going to game your comp plan to make the most this year? And really helping them understand it. And I think the same goes for the quota. Like if the sales managers are not advocates for, hey, these quotas are fair, the team's done the testing, it's they're not going to buy it if it's just a one-way message from one point in the organization. It needs to be a buy-in across the board.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, I would expect the manager to sit down with his directs and go through the account plan and where they are and what the outlook and so on and so on. Yeah, so you also want to encourage everyone to do proper, accurate forecasting. Yeah, so especially when you're owned by a venture capitalist or so, your investors really want to know what's going on. Yeah, so they don't want to have any made up numbers. Yeah, so they don't want you to be over a lot or under a lot. Yeah, so accurate forecasting and knowing what's going on is absolutely very important. So yeah, to your point, that you communication constantly, regularly, always.
We did something pretty unique where it was more like a road show, and I think it was connecting the dots together. And it was myself from sales comp and HR. It was revenue operations, and it was corporate finance. And the point of it generally was, here's how the number is developed, where we get the number overall, here's how it's distributed, and here's how you get paid on it. And it's connecting those dots that's so critical for them to feel like they're part of the process and that the process is fair from start to finish, right? And so I think that was really critical, because there's areas of I don't know how this I just feel like it's not fair. Like every quarter I get a new number and it's too high, right? It's not fair with the process. So explaining the process from a very general perspective, as much as a sales manager can describe it from their own process, is also critical, right? Because it connects the dots of who are the stakeholders that are responsible for the different areas, right? And so I think that was definitely a very productive process that we had, where we just started off with managers or the leadership team and then kind of cascaded down, right? And I think that helped release some of the pressure when you're expected to grow quarter over quarter and year over year, right?
So I'd like to move the conversation again. So I think, we've talked quite a bit about rolling out the plan, making sure it's a smooth process. I want to kind of move to the scenario where it hasn't gone well, and what does that look like? What are the common kind of pitfalls that crop up during the rollout that, I don't know, perhaps makes you realize it's April, we still haven't rolled out the plan. Maybe the field is completely confused about why they have these new changes. What are the things that people should avoid during that rollout process?
I guess I can start on this one. I've done enough bad things in my life. Um, I guess I'll go back. The first thing that comes to mind is that complexity. Where I've seen firsthand examples of the comp plan, maybe striking critical failure, is it just collapses under its own weight of complexity. That would be the first thing. The second thing is then the automation that you have to support whatever level of complexity. Obviously, we're always going to try to strive for more simplification in the comp plan. Really making sure that your technology, your automation can support that. Just so that if let's say you're rolling out a new tool, which we just went through this last year, we rolled out Anaplan as an example. I know someone was asking about the tech stack. So a territory planning tool, but with that also came a mindset shift of what's the underlying concepts of just, we don't set quotas per people anymore. We set quotas per territory, and a person just happens to manage either directly through layered that territory. So all of that requires, it's not just one person, it's a whole ecosystem of people having to deal with their own layered level of questions. And what does this either mean for me? What does this mean for the people that I'm interacting with, either because they report to me or I'm supporting them as sales ops? So there's a lot there that I think change, new tools, and complexity would probably be the three-headed monster for me in terms of driving those kind of scary moments.
And Don, if I could just interject on the complexity point that you made, I'm sure the answer is going to be all of the above, but what do you typically see that makes the plan too complex? Is it too many different objectives? Is it the way that you're measuring, too complex for a rep to follow all the different business rules that are involved?
Oh
What
yeah,
does it typically
yeah. I
look
give you
like?
plenty. Yeah. So it's the old adage that if everything is important, then nothing becomes important anymore, right? So we see that in all factors of life, but definitely with sales comp, limit how many number of measures that you may want to build in. We try to cap it at like 2 or 3 at most. The different mixes of products. Everybody wants to focus on their own bag. If you're organized like us, you have different business or business segments or whatnot, and everybody's crying about, well, we need to sell more service, or we need to sell more of this new product, whatnot. We've tried to greatly simplify that in terms of just what's in the bag for the garden variety feet on the street salesperson, right? So we want you to sell Siemens, right? We don't want you to sell this small little thing only, right? So it's taking that. Some of that's unavoidable. You're going to have specialized roles or specialized needs, or kind of new pushes into the market. That's fine, but as much as you can simplify that stuff, those are just some examples.
I think the worst that you can do, and I've seen that with a client, they worked from one extreme to another. There are no middle ground, yeah. So from underpaying anyone, no one hit anything, get anything paid for half a year. They now overpaid everyone dramatically, yeah. So to go back then and find the middle ground, that took them quite an effort, yeah. So and to calm down the sales force, that took them a lot, even more effort, yeah. So I would say before you just jump into action, if you see that something is not working perfectly, which it will never be, but it's really going bust, then do your homework, do your analysis, look at the data, look at the market trends, do all you can before you then go and change your comp plans throughout the year. Not like, oh, I need to jump to action now. No, 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 no. Then you're doing something wrong again. Yeah. So one step after the other, get a plan.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's sort of like I call it reducing the gravity of the moment. I mean, often something will happen, customer changes their mind, or something pops up in this region. Extending people's length of time to which this stuff will get resolved, having a trust that, okay, if there's something that doesn't look right in your comp plan, we still have an exception review process that tends to go a long way, where, okay, I can say that, the leadership committee will review this and they'll be fair by the end of the period. This kind of thing helps a lot.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think said this multiple times, but a bad comp plan hits you twice. It's like when you first make the mistake, and then like course correcting, and the point that you meant, Bettina, is like if everyone's hitting targets and everyone's performing, now you just took your middle or your bottom performers that were, or not bottom, but because they shouldn't be in the company, but you're kind of the bottom middle, and you just made them earn so much money that now it's relative to before. Now you have a problem there because they're not going to earn as much money in a balanced plan, and so you just kind of have this cascading effect. 100% way better to be methodical about it. So much money at stake in sales comp. It's like you have to treat it with the diligence that it deserves.
Mm.
For sure.
I wanted to ask about, during the year, that kind of the motivation throughout the year to make sure that everyone is, post-launch, everyone is still aligned after month 1, 2, 3, that they're still aligned with the actual plan design, and the objectives of the company. And so, it's kind of prompted in my head by one of the questions that has come in terms of best practices on, one example could be using dashboards, SPM tools, and using front-end dashboards to perhaps motivate the field. I mean, what are other tools, ways to do that? And I guess maybe specifically to answer the question about how do you guys design or think about designing dashboards to keep everyone motivated?
Well, we use that consistently, and we try to make sure that leadership, when they're either reviewing or they're having a dialogue, they're always using those dashboards, right? So it's not like just create one dashboard, here's the pay for performance, and it kind of sits in the side for a while until somebody remembers it exists, but kind of just keep putting it in their face. I would say the continuous process of just communicating. I mean, you execute, your plans are out, but that dialogue still needs to continue to happen, because the more you have dialogue, even if it's one-on-ones with, VP of sales and his directs, it really gives you the nuggets of gold that you need to plan ahead, right? Like, and for me, it's quarterly plans. So every quarter, there's kind of an opportunity of kind of refresh and so forth, right? But we use those. We have Looker dashboards on Google Sheets, and try to use as much of creativity, because as much as they're selling the product, we're trying to sell to them these plans and all of these, navigating these areas. So using creativity and newsletters and dashboards that really give them a quarter over quarter view of the success of their businesses is key. We also have reporting in our tooling, which we use exactly, and we've built out estimators, and we've built out reporting by managers if they need it every quarter. Here's how your attainments for your team. What else do you need? So they have that self-service mentality where they can pull their own reporting and use dashboards, to make any decisions that you need them to make, right? And that is extended to RevOps. It's extended to some level to StratFin, right? And so I think having that accessibility of data is key for those conversations to be easier towards the end of the year, right?
And you want to reinforce like positive behavior. So if you're trying to drive a specific outcome from a sales team with a comp plan change, one really useful dashboard or metric to show is, this year you've sold X deals like this, and you've made Y dollars more than you would have made last year if you sold the same deals. And just kind of reinforcing that you're going to make more money if you continue to do this behavior. And there's certainly ways to. I think, to me, it's individualization of comp plans, and we've talked about this multiple times, is a crazy faraway thought. I have many different perspectives on it. At the end of the day, you want to individualize to the customers and the territory, ideally in the best case, that that a rep is serving. It's harder to do for most organizations, but at least individualized to selling role. Okay. So you have comp plans that individualized to selling role. Communication, the more personalized you can make the communication, the more impactful it's going to be. And so dashboards that bring to life a specific rep's territory, the customers, the sales that they're making, and represent the type of behavior that we want them to see is going to be the thing that's going to get the most use and the biggest outcome.
Well, a dashboard also has the advantage that, like leadership dashboards, where they can compare each other, that has a good competitive edge to all of it, yeah. So, and is a bit of fun to add to your sales plan. But so there's the question: how do you determine when a comp plan change isn't working and action needs to be taken? Well, if you constantly need to look at your data from all different angles, not look at the same report again and again and again, look at it from different angles. And if you see that this is not doing what you were expecting it to do, then there's time to look into alternatives.
And what are you looking for in particular, though? I mean, I know Sylvia brought this up earlier in the conversation in terms of guiding principles. Are you trying to tie certain results to certain principles that the leadership set out at the beginning of the year? What are you specifically looking at?
I would look at my KPIs. So what do I want? It's not always revenue. It can be new territory. It can be certain verticals that you want to add to your portfolio or whatever it is. But if you see, like, let's say you want to add a certain vertical to your portfolio, and you see only 5 people signing up, yeah. So that means either your marketing is wrong, or it can be multiple reasons. But you need to do your investigation on why this is not working. And then you can take corrective measures to your comp plan. Maybe you did not do your market analysis, and this vertical does not even need the product that you are trying to sell.
Yeah, I think for us, it's Generally, are we being consistent across the businesses, right? So we're maintaining some level of consistency, maintaining some level of transparency of how you're being rewarded. Are you market competitive? Are your roles market competitive? Are you designing your plans against roles that are, popular in the business and really evolving in the business and staying on top of that? And then it's rewarding, trying to keep that bell curve of like overperformer, underperformers in that median, and kind of it should shift here and there depending on how much revenue comes into the business, right, and how successful they are. And so striving to make sure that we don't just have overperformers. There's those who will kind of fill in the blanks in the middle, and those who are under, and we have to train them and do all of these pieces, right? And so I think consistency, transparency, pay for performance, and market competitive are the key areas for, which I would recommend.
In terms of motivation, do any of you utilize any engagement surveys with the field to hear any feedback on what does the field, what do the reps think of the plan?
Yeah, that's a great one. We do have a globalized that our HR runs. We call it an engagement study, and the questions in there vary over periods of time. We're not yet at the point of specific questions about the sales comp plan, but I'd love to get there at some point. I think that's a good, right now I think it happens more informally by, hopefully good managers asking, and having dialogue with their people. But yeah, I would say that's a good practice to build.
So I think given we've covered quite a bit in the conversation, we've covered launch, we've covered pitfalls in rolling out the plan, we've covered how to keep everyone motivated. I'm looking at the Q&A right now. We've covered quite a bit of the questions as well in there. There is one that I kind of skipped over that I think is interesting, and we touched on it a little bit, but in terms of kind of extreme events, someone raising what happens if there's a sudden event like massive tariffs to particular countries? How have you guys seen something like this? What would you react to this if the plan's already rolled out, quotas are already rolled out? How would you guys work through this kind of a sudden change, and then how would you communicate it to the field?
And maybe just hitting
We
on the
went,
point. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was gonna say the point that you made, Don, earlier, like you're better off just saying, hey, we're seeing it, we're gonna react, everyone's gonna be fine, but let us fully do the analysis to figure out like what does this actually mean? Because rarely, I mean, yeah, the gravity of the moment is a very, very good point earlier. It's like, are
yeah,
you ready to make a judgment call about what to do?
I, that for sure is sort of a general cultural, way of dealing with things. Yes, but I would add to that though, if you're like us and you have a global business, so 2 years ago we had to deal with this. I mean, we sell into Eastern Europe, we sell into Ukraine, right? And so all of a sudden they've got a war on their hands, and your average, Siemens sales engineer might be, driving a tank instead of, selling automation tools to build, whatever factories. So in that case, yeah, we did have to look up and down, not just with the sales incentive, but with just the entire workforce. What sort of relief can we put in place? Because the market has drastically changed. Pandemic might be another example. So yeah, you're going to have those kind of global unique events that come up, and we would suggest just a statement somewhere in your policy that in such events, here's the playbook of what kind of relief we're prepared to give.
Yeah, I think it should be natural to have governance policies, right? You should have termination policies, LOA policies, exception policies, everything that ensures that the business continues to be successful even in a catastrophic event, right? And I think naturally businesses don't just die on the first day of something happening or something it's like we get band together to find a solution. One of the things, as an example, doesn't have to be catastrophic, right? It could just be like, wow, there's something impacting the business. We hired, a lot of young people. You hire a lot of young people in their stages of their careers. At some point they get married, at some point they have children. And once they have children, you have a lot of LOAs. What do you do with the accounts and setting up those accounts for success? And there's multiple people going on leave. And how do you support the business during this time, right? It's having those policies and assuring that the people who stay behind and are covering are being compensated for that. The people who are taking leave are compensated for that. And if there's anything that's out of the blue and really needs flexibility, we have an exception policy that really will allow us to be flexible in the areas that we need to be flexible, be more tight where we need to be tighter, and just have them and always give them the visibility to that, right? And making sure that they know that it's part of our onboarding. Like, here are our policies, and here's where you should take it some time and read through them, because at some point in your journey, you will need them, right? And so I think if they have that level of knowledge, I think that it lessens the reaction when there's an event that really impacts the business, right?
There's another question here, Sylvia, after your comment on bell curves and asking about what is the optimal bell curve. So I guess just in general, like what are the benchmarks you're using and looking at in terms of figuring out, do I have the right distribution in terms of earners?
I think it's tied to various factors, right? Depending on the role, the level. I think it depends on the quotas. That means you have to set your quota bands appropriately. You can't. It just kind of governs how well that bell curve is shaped. It depends on the business. You know, I come in at 110% of my number. You'll see it shift this way. 95% of our numbers, it shifts a little bit this way. But I think there's different variabilities in the process, and that has to do with just the roles, the team setup, the level, and the quotas, right? And so evaluate those, right? If your bell curve is kind of flopping and then not in the right shape, then it might have to do with your quota bands, right? Do we need to evaluate because the business now has $1 million quotas versus $10 million quotas, and we need to kind of take a look at that. It requires quarter over quarter constant like analysis of the data, right? Like, we can't just sit, the plan's done, it's ready to go, we're going to continue administrating it. Part of the design process is also evaluating your plan, right? Is it being successful? And are we keeping that bell curve, ideal bell curve that is natural in the competitive world, right?
I mean, yeah, there's general. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tina.
Well, but just so depending on the size of your company, if you have 20 salespeople and 10 are on vacation, then you might see some numbers not coming in. Or if you have seasonality and you have forgotten to build this in, then this you need to do something about it. Yeah. So in general, I can totally agree with Sylvia. You need to do you need to look at the data constantly. That's your best friend.
I mean, it's interesting because I feel like so there's the general shape of the attainment or the pay curve, and the bigger thing is probably like what's your pay curve should be tied directly to your quota setting accuracy. And then if you're seeing your attainment distribution at the end of the year have a different level of tight, like if the tightness of that distribution is far greater than what your perceived quota setting accuracy is, then that's probably a bigger tell for you to modify your pay curve than anything else. And so it's ultimately, to me, it's like the pay curve should be as steep as possible, the more confident we are with our quota setting process, right? And there's so much data that you can use to measure our perceived effectiveness or perceived accuracy, and then redesign your pay curve accordingly.
One of the challenges with this one that I see is sometimes the person that does, well, let me kind of back up. Probably many of us aren't even at the level of doing that bell curve assessment, looking back to the performance distribution and does it shape correctly and what guardrails, how many people do we expect to be at or above quota? All those kinds of questions that are really interesting. It's definitely best practice to do. I think some of us probably run out of time to be able to get that far, but let's say you do get that far. Then the next question is the person that's most locked in with that kind of analysis and interpreting it may not be the same person or persons that does the quota allocation at the start of the year. So getting that group kind of together to connect on, okay, we just learned all this from last year, how we did. Now we're going to go back and do the quota planning the same old way we did years before. It kind of lags and never catches up. So that would be my other call out.
100%.
Yep, 100%, yes.
Okay. Just looking at the rest of the questions. Anyone have any experience building in measures for pipeline and margin into the plans? Any
What was the
experience here?
question? Pipeline and margin?
And margin, I guess, separately. I guess for pipeline, obviously there's probably some, there could be danger there in terms of the quality of pipeline, but
there was an interesting debate. Probably most of us know this was a famous event that we had in Chicago a couple years ago, where there was a speaker talking about pipeline and what gets managed gets done, and if you build pipeline, then inevitably that convert rate turns into a booking. And I remember I was sitting at the table in the crowd. This was a spotlight event, and Rick Butler stood up. It was kind of comical, and he says, "I don't buy it." And I told him I'll never let him forget that moment. And it wasn't hostile or anything. It was actually kind of funny. But I would say there's probably an ongoing debate there as to where it's appropriate to pay for pipeline. I can tell you we do not. We have a pretty strict financial mindset that we pay what we book, is sort of the quote that we give. So margin for me is a separate thing. Do we implement margin in certain areas where there's local pricing influence or ability to drive higher margin content into a business? We see that more in our solution service business, where there's projects and things. There's added upsell or things that can go on with the project over time. So yeah, we absolutely build margin in, but broadly we're a top line, revenue order type of measure.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes back to, like, is that measure how solid is that of a data point? And most organizations' pipeline is a very ambiguous process. I know, some sales organizations, some of our customers prioritize forecasting accuracy, and it's something that they're very proud of as a sales organization. I think the more that you have that type of culture where you're kind of doing these reviews very regularly, there's systems and processes in place, the more you potentially use that data to itself drive an incentive. But I actually feel if the moment you add that in, it probably takes away from the forecasting accuracy
and the risk of gamesmanship.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's some unintended consequences. Again, I'm not saying don't do it, but I think just beware of the unintended consequences.
Yeah.
When I worked at HP, we did an analysis of the forecasting accuracy, and the forecasting accuracy was by around 5 to 10%. So that was really not good. Yeah, really, really, really bad. Some did not even put something in the forecast. Yeah. So what we did is we had the manager responsible for making sure that all his directs are putting something in and that it is better correct. Otherwise, the manager will not get a bonus. That worked.
Great comment.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're coming up on time, everyone. So I wanted to thank our panelists again. So Bettina, Sylvia, Dawn, and Nabil, thanks again for the conversation today. And I also want to extend a thanks to everyone who joined. Thank you so much. We will be running more sessions similar to this in the future, so please join us again. And everyone have a great rest of the week. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Great discussion. Absolutely. Bye-bye.